Okay, we have learned that the constitutional history of the Roman Republic began with a revolution that overthrew a monarchy in 510 BCE. In this session, we're going to take a look at a revolution that overthrew the Roman Republic, creating the Roman Empire in 27 BCE. Now, throughout the history of the Republic, the constitutional evolution was driven by the struggle between the aristocracy and the ordinary citizens, known as the plebeians. Now, while the last phase of Rome's constitutional history was dominated by questions of foreign and military policy, during the final decades of the Republic, many plebeians experienced worsening economic conditions. The long military campaigns forced citizens to leave their farms to fight, only to return to farms that had fallen into disrepair. Now, the new wealth entering from the conquered territories led to a fall in commodity prices that forced many farmers into bankruptcy. And while the landed aristocracy bought farms at discounted prices, the masses of landless, unemployed plebeians soon began to flood Roman cities, the centers of new commerce and wealth. And while food production went into the hands of the wealthy, the poor entered Rome. And naturally, as they entered, they went into the ranks of the legislative assemblies. Their poverty led them to vote for the candidate who offered the most, creating a culture of dependency, looking to any populist leader for relief. Now, the prior era saw great military success coupled with economic failures, but the patriotism of the plebeians kept the Republic from seeking reforms. But now the military situation stabilized, resulting in less demand for soldiers. And the role of land played a key part in the social struggle that ensued. Soldiers were given land as rewards for service, but many found it impossible to make a living in their small plots, and so they sold their land to aristocratic landholders who combined the plots into large plantations that were worked by slaves that were imported from abroad. And this process of labor transformation inflamed the unemployment situation further. Now, the wave of unemployed citizens to Rome made the assemblies overwhelmingly populist, leading to a very aggressive democracy. Now, the first reformers were two brothers, Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus, the grandsons of General Scipio. Known as the Gracchi tribunates, their goal was to weaken the Senate and strengthen the democratic forces. Now, the Gracchi brothers proposed to alleviate the social and economic stress by granting government lands to the landless. This lightened the city's burden of the landless poor, and it increased the number of landholders. It also increased the number of men eligible for military service, since all soldiers had to own land to serve. So Tiberius Gracchus was elected tribune in 133 BCE. He attempted to enact a law limiting land ownership. The aristocrats bitterly opposed a proposal that would make them lose enormous amounts of money. The aristocrats did not like the law that restricted the size of one's land to 300 acres per citizen, plus 150 acres per child. In this way, it minimized the power of the large farms by making land available for the poor. Tiberius's reforms highlighted the tension between the wealthy and the growing number of poor. While the law would be enacted, the patricians organized a riot where Tiberius would be murdered when he stood for re-election to the tribunate. His reforms acted as a spark to ignite further reform. Tiberius's brother, Gaius, was elected tribune in 123 BCE. And after his brother's murder, Gaius stood by the Land Reform Act and used the appeal of it to enact other reforms, including laws to stabilize the cost of grain, to check corruption in the provinces, to give the equestrian order a judicial role in checking the abuses of the senatorial class, and to propose giving citizenship to vast numbers of Italian allies. But by this point, Roman democracy will desert him, and when he stood for election to a third term in 121 BCE, he was defeated and then murdered. Now, two military generals, recognizing the weakness and incapacity of the Roman Senate, tried different strategies to end the economic inequalities and acquire political power in the Republic. And that was Gaius Marius and Lucius Cornelius Sulla. Gaius Marius was elected consul in 107 BCE, and he gave the poor jobs as soldiers in the army, creating a loyal following. Marius transgressed the established oligarchy by advancing unelected officials to magisterial office and by substituting magisterial edicts for popular legislation. Lucius Sulla, a member of the aristocratic party, observing the violent results of Marius's reforms from abroad, returned to Rome to strengthen the aristocracy and thus the Senate. Using Marius's example, he recruited an army to defeat Marius's army. And he made himself dictator, passed a series of constitutional reforms, resigned the dictatorship, served one last term as consul, and died in 78 BC. But what is important to understand about these two generals is that they gave future political leaders a template for acquiring power in the Roman Republic. In around 66 BCE, a movement to use constitutional or at least peaceful means to address the plight of the various classes began. Within 3 years, the movement turned into a conspiracy, discrediting the popular will and repairing the Senate's image. The 3 military generals, Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, known as Pompey the Great, Marcus Licinius Crassus, and Julius Caesar, known as Julius Caesar, combined their respective military powers in 60 BCE to gain control of the Roman government. And seeking to gain popular support through military victories, Julius Caesar went north and defeated Celtic and Germanic tribes, thus protecting the northern European borders of Roman territory. And Pompey in Rome, beginning in the summer of 54 BC, faced a wave of political corruption and violence for 5 years. Meanwhile, Crassus led an ill-fated expedition with legions against the kingdom of Parthia in the east, resulting in his defeat and death in 53 BCE. So that by 49 BCE, Caesar, through an agent, presented an ultimatum to the Senate, where the Senate then passed a resolution declaring Caesar an enemy of the Republic if he did not lay down his arms. The Senate then vested Pompey with dictatorial powers. Now, historians call the beginning of the transition to empire when Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon in 49 BCE. And legend has it that while crossing, Caesar announced, "The die is cast." Caesar's rapid advance towards Rome forced Pompey, the consuls, and the Senate to abandon Rome for Greece. And Caesar entered the city unopposed. With Pompey defeated, ordered restored, Julius Caesar ensured undisputed control of government. His centralization of power would ultimately be used by his imperial successors. And he assumed these powers by increasing his own authority and decreasing the authority of Rome's political institutions. Caesar held both the dictatorship and the tribunate by 48 BCE. And this made his person sacrosanct. And by 46 BCE, he took over censorial powers, robbed the aristocracy of its prestige, and passed laws allowing him to appoint all magistrates, consuls, and tribunes. Caesar was assassinated in 44 BCE. A group of senators, some of them once friends, were angry that Caesar had deprived the Senate of much of its power and prestige. So their motives were both personal and political. They cornered and stabbed him to death on the floor of the Senate. Representative government died with Julius Caesar, or Julius Caesar. Now, after his assassination, Mark Antony, a close friend of and a general under Caesar, formed an alliance with Caesar's adopted son and great-nephew, Gaius Octavian. Along with Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, another general and statesman, and a loyal follower of Caesar who had dined with him the night before the assassination, they formed an alliance known as the Second Triumvirate. And they held powers that were nearly identical to the powers that Caesar had held under his constitution. As such, the Senate and assemblies remained powerless even after the assassination. Octavian, Antony, and Lepidus exacted revenge on Caesar's enemies in the Senate. Then they divided the large Roman territory into 3 parts. Eventually, Antony and Octavian fought against each other for total control. Antony was defeated in the Battle of Actium in Egypt in 31 BCE. A year later, Antony and Cleopatra committed suicide. In 29 BCE, Octavian returned to Rome, completing the period of transition between the Republic and the Empire. Rome transitioned from being a city-state with a network of dependencies to being the capital of a world empire. A mushrooming slavery, decline of the free peasant farmer, economic competition from the provinces, enhanced political power of the generals, and the increased influence of Greek culture spelled doom for the constitutional governments of the Republic. The reforming efforts of the Gracchi brothers, Gaius Marius, Sulla, and Julius Caesar were not enough to counterbalance the impact of overseas conquest. And in essence, political violence ushered in by the assassinations of the Gracchi and continuing through the first and second triumvirates ultimately destroyed the Republic. Octavian was now the sole ruler of Rome, and he began a full-scale reformation of the military, fiscal, and political matters. And fresh from the defeat of Mark Antony, Octavian began to build his image as a staunch supporter of the Republic. He announced the restoration of peace, and even though he gave himself the title of emperor, imperator, or Augustus, he preferred to be called by his name. And Caesar was a component of his family name, hence Augustus Caesar. By the time of the Flavian dynasty, during the reign of Vespasian and that of his 2 sons, Titus and Domitian, the term Caesar had evolved almost de facto from a family name into a formal title. Augustus Caesar began a series of reforms using propaganda to secure and promote his rule. He systematically took power away from the Senate, and he became sole lawmaker and law executor, ending representative government of the Republic. Augustus Caesar controlled the army, determined government policy, instituted a new coinage system, introduced a range of public services, reorganized police and fire brigades, allowed cities and provinces more autonomy, and abolished the corrupt taxation system. And to engender further support, he began to build new colonies, not only to give Rome a feeling of progress, but also to alleviate the problem of the urban poor, thus removing a major source of social and political tension while also promoting the integration of the Roman heartland and identity throughout the empire. Augustus Caesar presented himself as a stern defender of traditional Roman morality, rebuilding temples and prohibiting Romans from worshiping foreign deities. He had his family portrayed as the model of domestic virtue and sexual propriety, despite his well-known affairs and his daughter's adultery. The literature of such men as Horace or Horace reflected this turn back to traditional Roman values of simplicity and morality. Poets who mocked this new morality, such as Ovid, were exiled. Augustus Caesar made use of art and literature to promote himself as a war leader and a defender of the Senate. Virgil, or Virgil, in the Aeneid, complied by idealizing his heirship to the empire. Literary artists wrote vigorous and uplifting prose promoting Augustus as the harbinger of peace and abundance. And under his rule, Roman art became distinct. And by limiting the importation of Greek ideas and art, new forms of art and architecture and paintings were developed. Grandiose and massive in proportion, they promoted Augustan power and prosperity. and realism was promoted in sculpture and art, showing Romans as they were and occupied in daily activities. Augustus' final goal was to figure out a method to ensure an orderly succession. In 6 BCE, Augustus granted tribunician powers to his stepson Tiberius. In the year 13 of the Common Era, a law was passed which linked Augustus' power over the provinces to those of Tiberius. Augustus had no choice but to recognize Tiberius as his heir, since Tiberius' legal powers were equivalent to and independent from those of Augustus. And within a year, Augustus was dead. So there were numerous episodes of intrigue amongst the first 4 emperors who ruled from the years 14 to 68 of the Common Era. They are called the Julian emperors or the Julio-Claudian dynasty because they were all related to Julius Caesar or Julius Caesar. Augustus was succeeded by his stepson Tiberius, the son of his wife Livia from her first marriage. His reign came to be characterized by paranoia and slander, where he began a series of treason trials and executions of people within his administration. And this continued until his death in the year 37. The successor was Gaius, or Gaius, Tiberius' grandnephew, better known as Caligula, which means little boots. He started out well, but quickly became insane. And in 41, Caligula was assassinated, and for 2 days following his assassination, the Senate debated the merits of restoring the Republic. And due to the demands of the army, however, the next successor, Claudius, was declared emperor. And he proved to be an able administrator with reasonable ability, but he had an unsuccessful marriage with his niece, who may have poisoned him in the year 54. Nero succeeded Claudius, focusing attention on diplomacy, trade, and increasing the cultural capital of the empire. However, Nero proved to be cruel and quite mentally disturbed, becoming a tyrant. And wanting to build a palace in a section of Rome that was already settled, he set fire to it, giving credence to the phrase that while Rome burned, Nero fiddled. He was forced to commit suicide in 68. Nero's suicide was followed by a brief period of civil war known as the Year of the Four Emperors. Soldiers serving under military governments developed loyalty to commanders rather than the emperor. And between June 68 and December 69, Rome experienced the successive rise and fall of Galba, Otho, and Vitellius, with Vespasian securing the position for 11 years until his death. His rule begins what is known as the Flavian dynasty. Now, Vespasian is famous for beginning the construction of the Colosseum, weakening the Senate, and through sound fiscal policy, building a surplus in the treasury. His ascendancy revealed that any successful general could legitimately claim a right to the throne. Titus, Vespasian's son and successor, held the opening ceremonies in a Colosseum that had not been completed. But Titus died in 81, and Titus was succeeded by his brother Domitian, whose tyrannical character became repulsive and in September of 96 was murdered. Now, what followed were 5 emperors who stamped the next century with a period of peaceful successions, bringing significant prosperity. The period became known as the 5 Good Emperors, and each emperor of this period was adopted by his predecessor. Nerva, who succeeded Domitian, confiscated property and involved the Senate in his rule. In 112, Trajan, followed by marching on Armenia and annexing it to the Roman Empire, turning south into Parthia, taking several cities, and declaring Mesopotamia as part of the empire. Trajan is known for expanding the empire to its greatest size, as indicated in the map. Hadrian strengthened the empire's defenses with fortresses and walls, one of which is Hadrian's Wall, found in North England. The last 2 of the 5 good emperors, Antoninus Pius, Marcellus or Marcus Aurelius, experienced comparative peace, stability, and prosperity. Marcus Aurelius defended the northern border against many raids launched by Germanic tribes. So the era of 5 good emperors was brought to an end by the reign of Commodus, the son of Marcus Aurelius. He became paranoid, slipped into insanity, and was murdered in the year 192. So between 192 until 235 reigned what is known as the Severan dynasty. Septimius Severus, the first of the dynasty, cultivated the army's support and substituted equestrian officers for senators in key administrative positions. His son Caracalla, extended full Roman citizenship to all free inhabitants of the empire. An increasingly unstable and autocratic, Caracalla was assassinated by Macrinus, who succeeded him, before being assassinated and succeeded by Elagabulus. Alexander Severus, the last of the Severan dynasty, could not control the army and was assassinated in 235. And with his death, it marked the end of the Pax Romana, or Roman peace. Now, the Pax Romana witnessed unprecedented wealth and prosperity, most of which came from imports and exports extending all the way from England to China. And during the Pax Romana, several significant improvements in Roman rule occurred. Emperors learned to carefully choose governors of the provinces to keep them under control. The emperors, following Augustus's lead, became the chief priest of the Roman state religion, replacing the office of Pontifex Maximus. All emperors henceforth were considered divine, in fact, godlike, and worthy of worship. All conquered peoples could become citizens with rights and privileges, thus creating loyalty in the provinces. They were even allowed to join the Roman legions. So during the Pax Romana, cities teemed with activity as theaters, gymnasiums, taverns, baths, and brothels proliferated. Forums and temples characterized Roman towns and cities, with aqueducts bringing water to urban centers and wine and oil imported from abroad. Over 130 holidays allowed Roman citizens to enjoy festivals, races at the Circus Maximus, and gladiatorial contests at the Colosseum. And the chief Roman contributions to architecture were the arch and the dome. And many impressive projects, such as the Parthenon, were constructed. And each emperor stamped his reign with an architectural feat. Urban requirements forced refinements in engineering and building construction technology. Major roadways were built to connect the empire, the first being the Appian Way. As with any civilization, slavery and slaves were instrumental parts of the social order. 25% of the population were bought and sold in open slave markets, with some slaves freed by the masters for services rendered, or others saving money to buy their freedom. Now, the center of the social structure was the family, or the familia, the family, which was not only marked by blood relations, but also by legally constructed patriarchy. Originally, only the patrician aristocracy enjoyed the privileges of what were known as paterfamilias. Their practices were copied by the plebeians as the empire expanded. The male was the absolute head of the family. He was master over his wife, his children, the wives of his sons, the nephews, the slaves, and the freedmen. He could dispose of them and of their goods at will, even putting them to death. The male was responsible for religious observances, and both mother and father underscored traditional Roman values such as the importance of order, obedience, and hard work. So we end this presentation with a brief discourse on Western civilization's linguistic heritage. The language of Rome before its expansion was Latin, and that's why I've been trying to pronounce the best that I can all the names in Latin. And this became the empire's official language. And as imperialism grew, Latin began evolving into two languages, the classical and the vulgar. The classical remained the language in the center, while the vulgar became the spoken word in the western and northern provinces, later evolving into the modern languages known today throughout Europe: Italian, French, Portuguese, Spanish, Romanian. Greek and classical Latin were considered the languages of literature, scholarship, and education. And in the eastern part of the empire, the Greek language was the spoken word, with the exception of Carthage. And as I shared with you, the Romans committed genocide in Carthage. Romans tolerated local cultures and languages. They left established customs in place. Greek was retained, and as an administrative language, it was used to enhance bureaucratic efficiency. So, in the north, in the west, was Latin. In the east was Greek. Now, you are now ready to view the documentary that follows this presentation. Thanks.